Welcome to the Mindcraft Podcast. My name is Kimberly Quinn, and I am here once again with the amazing Jim Stutz, a dear friend from our mastermind group. We hit it off right away like peas and carrots. Jim is a retired middle school teacher and currently, this is awesome, currently creating an online, well, he's got an online platform. He's currently creating videos for teens and young adults on literature, all the cool novels and everything. So we'll put all that in the blurb at the end. So I invited Jim back, but not only because he's incredibly knowledgeable and interesting, but also because his particular areas of interest, in my opinion, gel beautifully what Minecraft is about, which is becoming the boss of your brain, taking charge of your life, and living your best life. And so, Jim, I'm going to let him pass the torch in just a second. We're talking about sort of the importance of play, but Jim was inspired by a book, which I'm going to let him tell you about, by Bronne Ware, and the things people regret when they're dying, which is only part of our conversation. It's just an inspiration because one of them, which I believe is the last one, is their regret was, I wish I would have let myself be happier, paraphrase. So welcome, Jim. We're so glad to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me back.
And so, excellent, Jim. So let's let you carry the ball here. So Bronne Ware wrote the book, is it the top 5 regrets of the dying?
Yes, Bronne Ware. She was a
Bronne
hospice
Ware.
nurse. Yeah,
Okay.
she was, or maybe still is, a hospice nurse who, over the course of something like 12 years of getting to know these patients she was working with, who, they were on hospice, so they knew they were dying.
Right.
And she would talk to them about their life journeys, and she
Mhm.
noticed how certain regrets of theirs kept coming up. There were certain themes that kept reappearing in these conversations. And so she noted 5 of them that were consistent, and she wrote this book about the top 5 regrets of the dying and goes into, what those were, and what the purpose of our conversation today is to learn from that, so those of us that are still here and vital can take the wisdom of that and put it into practice now so that we don't have those regrets when we come to that point in our lives.
Before it's too late. I haven't had this
Absolutely.
time of year yet, right here, where we have the sun
Huh.
issue. So before it's too late. So, wow, right there is super powerful. And I remember that you were talking, Jim, about all these different things. And also, I'm not sure where you want to start here because I know there were 3, 4, 5 different points about, especially with kids being outside and just in the natural play. Because if you and I just said play now, people might go straight to video games. That's not what you were talking about. Like, gee, I regretted not playing more video games.
Right. No, when it comes to that, I think, you know, children of previous generations play meant much of the time being outside, but even if they were inside, they were doing things that engaged their imaginations or their brains. They were reading, or they were playing with action figures or dolls, or building blocks, or models, or they were outside and they were either playing with their friends, or they were riding their bikes, or they were digging in the dirt. They were just kind of like following their curiosity
Right.
and learning from that and discovering things about themselves, and just sometimes not learning because it was just the built-in part of us that needs to play. And obviously that's in the past been a crucial part of childhood, but it's something that should stick with us throughout life, but we often lose touch with it as we get older.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jim, because at a fabulous 59, I remember even being in like a suburban area of New York, you threw your backpack in after the bus, you were out the door. We also had there was very little weight. There were very little, few weight issues either because we were outside running around all the time,
Right.
and you could tell by the bikes on the yard where it was all happening. Right. Then
Yeah.
eventually, it was the mothers back then. They'd start screaming out the door, and by the time they got to your middle name, it was serious, and you went in. But like you didn't even have a concept of time. It
No.
was
No.
just off the bus to dinner. That was the time. No
Yes.
Apple Watches, no phones. So what do you think has happened, Jim? Tell us. You say adults don't have it. Why? What happened?
Well, I think it starts when we're still children. Our school systems, from pretty much the time kids go into school at kindergarten, or now they have pre-K and even earlier than that, being regimented and being sort of forced to comply and obey, and having their natural curiosity and playfulness peeled away because that doesn't fit in with the program. And so that sticks with you, and it sort of gets compounded over the course of our careers in school. Sometimes we come from home lives where that kind of freedom and play is also discouraged. And then we get into work where it's all about, following rules for most people. Maybe some example or some exceptions for certain creative endeavors, but that's very few people that are in roles like that. And so I think we just get worn down through our experiences in these systems.
Well, it's interesting, Jim, because I remember it's just coming into my mind now. My mother-in-law is a retired third grade teacher. She taught for decades. And we had this talk because she's in a state that's huge on standardized tests. I know it's across the United States, but it's different. This particular, I can just say it's Massachusetts. So Massachusetts, and I don't want to say it's all bad or whatever, but she was very aware of the creativity piece. And, they teach to the test. They don't teach to. So I remember back in the day, if somebody's without the internet, none of that stuff, right? If somebody's parents or grandparents or whoever went to Mexico or some other cool country, they came back with maracas or, whatever, and it was like you were the show and tell, and you're like the show and tell kid, and you're all like that's squashed for her, at least in that particular state. It's all about teaching to the test. I mean, what do you think is happening to the creativity piece since the conforming and the play are being squashed?
It's being killed, basically. When I was teaching, I taught seventh and eighth graders for the most part, and I taught multiple subjects, one of which was art. And it'd say, okay, it's art time, and you'd think that should be a time for joy and hey, we're gonna make something fun.
Right,
No,
right, right.
not for junior high kids. They were horrified. They
Really?
just they were paralyzed about making something, being creative, drawing, painting, or whatever, because they thought it had to be look a certain way and be a certain way. And I'm sure they had been told that make sure you color inside
Right.
the lines and follow these rules, even though we're supposed to be playing.
Right.
And it used to just really confound me. And I got to the point one time with my eighth graders, I said, okay, we're going to do finger painting today.
Yes, 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 yes,
Let's
yes.
let's see if you can kind of remember what that was like, how fun that was. And I gave them all finger paints and played some music in the room. I said, just paint whatever this music makes you feel like, and
That's
and
awesome.
most of them really got into it. But there was I remember one kid who, even under those circumstances, just could not break out of his paralysis, and he felt really bad, like he couldn't even let himself cut loose and with finger paints. And those kids are only 13 or 14 years old, but they by that time had 7 or 8 years of this, indoctrination or
Yeah.
having the creativity removed from them. Where when a young child draws a picture and gives it to us, and the head's over here and the
Right.
eyes are somewhere else and
Right.
letters are all over the place, it's like genius almost, because there's such freedom in it and such
Yeah.
joy apparent in it. And that's what art or play should be.
No, I love that. You're bringing me back to when they are little like that, and the letters are all different sizes, and
Yeah,
it's like, the skirt is this big and the head is this big, the whole thing.
yeah,
And they're so proud to give it to you. It's for
yeah.
Mother's Day or your birthday or something, and they created this masterpiece, and they're so full of joy.
Hmm.
And there was
Yeah.
something else and I read what you gave me, Jim, about the NASA. There was a study, and just it was only two. I might not get the percentages right, but very few. Why don't you go ahead and tell us the adults versus the kids on the creativity test?
Yeah, this goes back to, I believe, the 1960s when NASA, was charged with putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And so someone devised some sort of a test to evaluate creative genius because they knew they were going to need some people that were creative geniuses to figure out how they were going to achieve this task. And among the group of people that took it, adults, only 2% tested as creative geniuses. And sometime after that, they started giving this same test to young children, like 5 years old. 98% of them were creative geniuses, according to the test.
What's that
And
telling
so the
us?
creators of the test at that time, and we're talking now 60 years ago, blamed our education system for
Wow.
beating the creativity out of our children. So even that long ago, this started to
Wow.
become.
And it seems to me, Jim, that that's even more telling because that 60 years a lot has happened, and that was pre cell phones, pre computers, pre all of it. And
Yeah.
so it's much easier to be creative then in some ways
Yes.
than in childhood now. I mean, so what do you think maybe the effect, what it's like now with the technology? What do you think that's the role that this plays?
Oh, I think it's compounded the problem. There was I've written a series of essays about a lot of these topics, one of which is what we're talking about today. I wrote another series or another essay about the question you just asked, based on an article I read in the New York Times probably almost a decade ago, in which they were saying that in New York City, where they have, some of these super elite schools for those who can afford them and get into them, even going down to like kindergarten and things like that, that at that time, about a decade ago, they had enough information about having used technology in their schools that they took a look at it to see if it was a positive force or not. And they came to the determination that they were going to remove all technology from the most elite schools in New York City, which is pretty profound when the people that are at the upper echelon of the education system with all the money and all that stuff, when they look at it and they say, we've tried this and
Doesn't work.
it's not adding to our
Right.
children's experience as an educational tool, and therefore we're removing it, that should tell you something very profound.
And 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. And in the meantime, most of the other schools just keep doubling down and tripling down on more technology, more technology. And to the point where children's creativity, including teenagers, high school kids, is almost just gone. The ability to like think creatively, think open, answer an open-ended question, to connect concepts and ideas. It's all been replaced by, like you said, teaching to tests and inflating GPAs so that they can
Oh,
get
don't get me
into
started
all
with
these
that.
schools and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And it's like, so these kids, you have this generation of students now who have 5 point something GPAs, and every class is an AP class, but they don't really know much.
Right.
They know how to get the grades, but nothing is really sticking with them.
How to
There's
get
not
the
any
inflated
depth.
grades.
Yeah.
right? So really what they're learning is just what you just said, Jim, just and also with the example with the standardized tests um, earlier, is that they're learning how to navigate this kind of conformity maze of how to get
Yeah.
to the prize, which probably isn't a prize we really want them to be
Yeah.
seeking, right? The
And
prize would maybe be what? Authenticity.
authenticity, critical thinking skills.
Mm-hmm.
I always hear for years now that the most valuable thing an employer wants in an employee is creativity. Well, I don't see where they're learning that. You know?
Right, or being allowed to. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know, and a little bit of a side note, but as far as neurodivergence goes, employers are finally getting a little more savvy with who they hire when they need creativity, because the Fast Mind
Mm.
Club, and that's a superpower. So there's a lot of people. Just a side note with that, because I think we're in a danger zone no matter what when we're crushing creativity, because that's how it gets done, right? And also,
Yeah, and
Jim, go ahead.
mm. Well, what you just said made me think of people that we look back on in history who, um, people like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and Albert Einstein and people we'll maybe don't know their names, who were not the ones who were doing well in school and following all the doing of things everybody else was supposed to do to get the good grades and all that stuff, but they somehow stayed in touch with their creativity
Mm-hmm.
and changed the world because of it.
Oh, 100%. CEOs like JetBlue, there's so many. Whoopi Goldberg, Tom Cruise, Beethoven. It's hard to diagnose dead people, but there are quite a few creatives. No, but you're right, because when that different wiring is naturally distracted, they don't do the conformity corn maze kind of thing and land there anyway, which is kind of neat. But I know what I was going to ask you, Jim, because creativity is so big, right? It doesn't just mean on a canvas or music,
Mm.
or it's inventing, it's innovation, right? It's also problem solving. When you're talking about NASA, that took my web thinking mind straight to Apollo 13, when they, if you've seen that, when they come up with in a pressure cooker, come up with how to save those lives and get those men back. That's all part of creativity. So think about what we're
Absolutely.
doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, creativity has a million different forms. It's not just artistic creativity. It's any opportunity to think outside the box and see something somebody didn't see before.
Exactly. And also, I think a lot of people get confused that creativity has to be something brand new, when it can be something that was, from somebody else or 300 years ago, and you're looking at it with a whole new lens. That
Hmm.
counts too. So, like you're saying, Jim, with all the ways that we're kiboshing it, it's really kind of seems like it's almost multifaceted.
Yeah, it's coming at people from every angle, adults as well as young people. Just there's a school of thought about creative people like that. I think Henry Ford might have been one of them, um, where they value time to do nothing,
Yes.
which other people would consider goofing around. And that might be laying in a hammock, it might be sitting under a tree, it might be taking a nap or whatever, because people who are on that creative wavelength understand that that's often where the seeds begin to grow.
Totally.
And yet, we are in a culture in America where that is totally not okay, because
No.
everybody has to be productive all the time, and even when they're supposedly having fun. um,
I think
Even
you're
fun
right
has
about the
become too
stigma.
structured.
Say it again, Joe. I'm sorry.
I said even fun has become overly structured.
Oh God, isn't that the truth? It's leading me now, the author of the book, but it was called The Overscheduled Child. And just like your
Mm.
examples that were like 10 years ago, this was more than 10 years ago, but not 20, somewhere in the middle there. And even he back then was like, the kid gets home from school and it's dance and then baseball and there's like, you have a time slotted 15 minutes to eat a dinner that's not even, they're not even sitting there and and they're so tired, they're so mentally, they've become conditioned to keep up with that. And there goes the
Yeah, I
creativity.
know. Yeah, I know, unfortunately, too many people that are living like that right now, and it's really hard to watch because I can see from outside the price they're paying
Yeah.
individually and as whether it's a family or a friendship or just that child on its own, like they're just so worn out.
And just leading, I'm sure, to an overall societal exhaustion. I remember when we used to play tag and all that, especially this time of year, when the days start to get a little bit shorter. It was really dusky. We pushed it to the last second to stay outside, I think it also, what it's also robbing, Jim, maybe. See what your thoughts on this are. Is children tend to be pretty timeless until they hit teenage year. Time just doesn't feel like, without Apple Watches, go back a ways. It's like you're off the bus and then there's dinner, but the whole middle seems slow. It seems like you're playing this. It feels like you've got all day, like you've got all week.
Hmm.
You don't feel this incessant, I have to do this, have to do that. I think maybe that's lost too because it's restful to not be conscious of the structured time.
Totally. I think that is such a big thing that we could start to work on. I think that might be a good place to start for people
Right.
is, you know, actually taking time to experience the things we're doing moment by moment, whether it's sitting down to breakfast, actually sitting down to breakfast instead of just shoving something down your throat while you're walking out the door. Like actually starting to add little bits of time back into these activities that are necessary for survival to begin with, and then the ones that are not necessary but are still essential, and
Right.
actually restoring that it takes some time to do these things, and let's actually set aside enough time to sit and enjoy it without having to rush through it.
Right. And not even a lot of time. I mean, breakfast is. So I think it seems like you're talking about really what mindfulness is, right, Jim? Because a lot of people get it confused with meditation. I think you have to sit like a Tibetan monk in a cave eating yogurt. It's really just about being present. If you're eating breakfast, just eat breakfast. No, not while you're
Yeah,
scrolling on your cell phone. If you're going to brush your teeth, brush your teeth. If you're going to read your child a book, just be fully present with you, your child, and Dr. Seuss.
absolutely. One of my favorite things to do, I started doing this many years ago, was if there's a TV on in the room to turn it off. Just if somebody pays attention to the energetic shift when that happens,
It's huge.
even if the sound is off on the TV,
Right.
it's still its presence while it's on is sending out electronic vibrations and things like that. And when you turn that off, there's a calm that just instantly makes itself
100%.
present. And
100%.
it's the same thing with our phones and all that other stuff. Like, if we were to actually kind of take a daily accounting of from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, how much time, if at all, do we spend not on our phone or watching a screen or our laptop or any other kind of things or music, as much as I love music? but we need times of peace and quiet, even if there's other people around. But just turning off the devices for a few moments, there's just this shift in energy that brings a sense of calm into a space that we've really lost touch with.
I 100% agree with you. And I think to be truthful, I think I'm particularly sensitive to that because we're not a big TV. We kind of controlled that with the kids. Nothing was
Mm.
ever on during dinner. We all sat right there,
Mm.
though it was a different table, and there was no, none of that was on. And we asked about our days and things like that. But when I go to someone else's house and there's a TV on, like in the kitchen, it's just background noise. Why do you need
Yeah.
background noise?
I think we're so accustomed to it. I mean, I've been a guest in people's homes where as soon as somebody's awake, the TV goes on,
Oh
even if
God,
nobody's sitting and watching it, and it's filling the house with noise, and it's oftentimes news, which is a horrible way to wake up.
definitely.
Um,
Oh, I'm 100% with you.
yeah, and it's just like it's become so habitual. You know, you wake up and the first thing you do is turn on a radio or TV or grab your phone, and we don't just let ourselves be in the space we're in.
It is habitual. I agree. Or creatures of habit, and so it can sometimes take a heavy lift. So Jim, let's maybe shift into a place of we've figured out that it's a definite problem. I 200% agree with you. What be your tips or suggestions for parents and maybe educators and maybe just seasoned adults who weren't realizing that they've gotten invasion of the mind snatchers or to be able to get back on track to some with less distraction, more solitude, being more present, more to open up the doors for creativity. So how do we open up the door to bring that back?
Um, I think if you ask most people, they would probably acknowledge that there's a lack of that kind of peace in
Mm-hmm.
their daily lives. And so I think I would just encourage them to try to pick a time of day that is doable for them, where they will commit to, even if it's 5 minutes of turning off whatever it is, um, and just sitting and being quiet. Um, and depending on the time of day and where they are, if it's somewhere, maybe they're at home, they could sit outside,
Mm-hmm.
get some fresh air, and just actually start to reconnect with the world that's around them all the time that they are not paying attention to. And I think just with those little short snippets of time, if people do it for a few days even, it will start to they'll start to see the value of it, and then they'll want to do a little bit more of it, or maybe add another session at another time of day, and that might carry over to dinner time, and okay, everybody put your phones away, and but I think it has to start with little tiny tastes
Right.
of that.
I think because it's gone so far out of control, right? That
Yeah,
baby
and
steps at this point.
yeah, and I try to also remember that, I mean, people of our age remember before all this technology, but even people I think who are like 40 probably don't remember a time where there wasn't technology everywhere. So
Right.
I try to keep that in mind too. Like there's a significant amount of people who don't know the difference, that there ever was any other
Right.
way of being. And so you sort of have to introduce it with that understanding as well.
Right. And especially, of course, the Gen Zs who've gotten so much negative press when in reality, more than anybody, the 40-year-olds for sure, but more than anything, when the Gen Zs arrived on this earth, all of it was here in
Hmm.
full blown, full tilt. The iPhones and I only so much of what people are saying is their fault, if any, right?
Right.
They've
Yeah,
been
well, because their
conditioned out of the
parents probably
crib.
were already, yeah. because their parents
Yeah.
were probably already using all this stuff, so they didn't think anything of it being around for their children.
No. And even if you compare like the big boxy computers of the 90s and stuff, the Gen Z showed up with all of it working and across the globe and everything else. So, okay, so
Mm.
so baby steps. I know one that I suggest that I do. The kitchen drawer that's right over there is where my phone goes to bed.
Mhm.
Because I think one of the biggies too, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but people, I know my students do it because they admit it. When the first thing many people do before they even get out of bed is reach for their phone on the nightstand, even well, my students, some of them have it under their pillows. Not a healthy thing.
No.
No, I mean, right out of the gate before you've even had tea or done a gratitude journal, just off and running, you know?
Yeah, and there's something else along with that that I think we need to start to consider and introduce is what is the nature of the content you're consuming? Whether
Okay.
it's turning on the TV first thing in the morning or looking at your phone, if you're going to go right to news or social media, depending on what it is. I mean, the very first thing you're feeding your brain and your spirit within seconds of awakening is toxicity.
It's so toxic. I'm actually glad you used the word. I was kind of tiptoeing around it, but it's just inviting because the brain is an association machine. So no matter what, the minute the text is read, you can't tell your brain don't read this like a stop sign, like it's gonna see it's gonna see stop, right? And it's immediately making all these connections. You're not even out of bed yet.
Yeah.
So no wonder our ability to problem solve and create and innovate, and it's not a big shocker. So, well, I think, Jim, this has been wonderfully sobering. And I think the first awareness is huge, right? I mean, in general, we can't do what we don't know. So I think you've brought a ton of awareness to parents and professionals and those in the seasoned, midlife, that didn't grow up with it, but have maybe been consumed anyway, but at
Yeah.
least have an idea of what it used to be like, and really some good ideas about how to turn that around. And are there any other tips or suggestions you might want to say to people?
Yeah, I think I would ask them like, what um, what do you want less of in your daily life, and what do you want more of in your daily life? And if you, especially if it's somebody who's maybe has children and they're married, they probably would like more time, actually, quality time with their loved ones. And so, what do you want less of is less of the things that are consuming that time. And so then we can start to identify, well, in each case, what is that for you? Is it too many sports practices? Is it, that you're commuting too far to and from work? You're on the road, in Southern California where I live, some people are 4 hours on the road to and from
Oh,
work, 2 hours each way in traffic.
oh,
So, by the time they get home, they're certainly not in any kind of mood, I'm sure, to be real jovial with their families.
wow, that's
And
depleting.
it is, so now that's a big one, but we saw during COVID, a lot of people, when they couldn't go to work, were realizing the cost
Right,
of
right,
what their
right.
jobs had been, and especially in terms of things like commutes. So start to identify, like, what are the things that are taking up that precious time that are
Right,
not fulfilling?
right.
And are they things that you can start to make little adjustments to? I'm a big fan of Martha Beck, and she talks about making these small 1 degree adjustments.
Right.
You don't have to change 180 degrees overnight, just 1 degree at a time. So are there those little 1 degree adjustments you can make to start to shift the way your time is spent in bringing more ways into it that are actually fulfilling, to go along with our theme today, so that when you do leave this earth, you don't look back with all this regret.
Oh no, that was powerful because we're not. It sounds to me like basically like you're creating a life minute budget.
Yeah.
Like if it were cash, would you spend $100 on this sweater with the hole in it at a yard sale? Probably not. Evaluate if answering every single email for 2 hours is worth not playing checkers with your kid or whatever. Or being on a walk by yourself in the woods or with a partner, walking the dog, whatever, right? Because I think it seems so unconscious, Jim, like you were saying earlier, we're conditioned. So until we make, the whole society is king, so until we make a conscious choice that this is no longer working, and like you just said, make a list, like 2 columns. What do you want more of? What do you want less of? That could be sobering if you actually got a pen. I mean, actually wrote it down
Yes.
and looked
Yes.
at your own life.
Yeah, I think we have to do that, to get it outside of our heads and
Right.
actually in a concrete form, so we can go, oh my gosh, I really do that, or I don't do
Like it's
that.
smelling salts. Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously.
Oh yeah.
I'm not even joking.
Very
Like,
much.
oh my God. I just spent
Yeah.
an hour and a half hitting reply all or whatever.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I have these charts that I've used before I used to use them with my students, and it's a breakdown of the entire week actually, in little half-hour boxes. And I would always have my students fill these out at the beginning of the school year, like what time do you wake up? What time do you have breakfast? What time do you leave the house for school? Like you have to account for every moment. I spend this much time in the car. I spend this much time at school. So that you can, when you lay that out, then you can see if there are any
Where to
blocks of
go.
open time. When am I going to do my homework? And, when am I going to do whatever else it is? And I mean, most of us, we probably would cram, a million things into
Right.
one day's worth of activities. And if, like you said, if it were written and we could look at it and we accounted for our time, I spent, an hour and a half answering emails, 2 of which were important.
Right.
Um, you know, then we could again start to make those little 1 degree adjustments.
Because like you said, Jim, in the end, do you want it to say on your memorial stone, man, she answered all her emails?
Right.
Or like if you flip that around to the negative, like he or she or they, whoever missed out on, like a life calculator, all these hours with on the back
Oh
deck
yeah.
with a lemonade or with the partner, with the friend. And when we look at that, I'm a big fan of writing stuff down for yourself because it really does make it real.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to stay in denial and just keep it in our heads, but like when it's mapped out right in front of you,
Yeah.
there it is. Well,
Yeah. Deal with it.
you have to deal with it, right? So this has been absolutely fantastic, Jim. So, all right, folks, if you would like to contact Jim if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation or anything like that, Jim's information will be underneath in the blurb. And that's it. So I'd like to thank the amazing Jim Stutz for this is going to be episode 1 of 4, I think. We didn't decide that yet.
4
Today's
plus maybe 5.
4 or maybe 5. But this is the first episode. So if you're liking what you hear, please tune in for the next one. And until then, thank you so much, Jim, for being a part of the Minecraft podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I've appreciated it and enjoyed every moment.